groups and readers of all stripes. I'm Kathy Beard of the Norman Williams Library, and tonight's program features three women who are so enthusiastic about books, they've built their professional lives around them. Lisa Christie is the co-founder of the Book Jam blog, which connects readers with great reads. She promotes literacy and fundraisers for nonprofits such as libraries, and she is our moderator tonight. Carrie Moish and her husband Christian have taken Woodstock's Yankee Bookshop to a whole new exciting level. And also with us is Liana Kish, who is on sabbatical from teaching high school English for 24 years in Massachusetts. And you may ask her if this was a good year to take a sabbatical. Together they will make recommendations for your reading pleasure, and you will find your next best read, I guarantee it. We have some handouts, a list of tonight's recommended books, a list of helpful resources to continue your search for a fantastic read, and a surprise bonus. And now the housekeeping part. All of tonight's technical aspects will be in Meg Brazil's steady hands. The evening will be recorded, so you may revisit anytime once we put it up on the website. Although your video and microphone have been turned off, we do want to hear from you. So please use the chat and the Q&A button, which you can usually find at the bottom of your screen, to ask questions, make comments, or let us know of any tech problems. Both Meg and I will monitor the comments and will pass them to the presenters for their responses at the end of the program. In case you didn't know, Woodstock's fabulous Yankee Bookshop gives a 15% discount for registered book groups or clubs. All you have to do is call them, register your group, and keep them updated with your current selection. And also, they're extending this 15% discount to all associated sales from this program, available until April 30th. The link to that will be provided in the chat. Use the coupon code in conjunction with the Book Jam list. And so, on with the show. Lisa, Carrie, and Liana, welcome, and thank you all so much for presenting tonight. Take it away, Lisa.
Thank you so much for inviting us. We've been talking about this for a while, so it's kind of weird that it's already April 6th and we are here. There will be three of us, as Kathy said, who will be reviewing books tonight, Carrie, Liana, and myself. And we're each reviewing 8 books or so. You'll see in my case, I cheated a little bit, so that number is not exactly precise. We have limited ourselves to 90 seconds to talk, which means it'll be more like 2 minutes, but hopefully it'll sometimes be 60 seconds to average out to about 90 seconds. And I say that just so that you know, this isn't a full review of each of the books that we're talking about. It's just sort of a teaser. Hopefully we'll give you enough that the book we're talking about will be of interest to either you or your book club, or a book club of somebody you know, or someone you know. But that's what we're looking for. Take notes. The reviews will be posted on the Book Jam website on Monday, so you don't have to take extensive notes. There will be a list in the chat, so you can order books as we go, or you can order books at the end, or as Kathy just said, Carrie and the Yankee Bookshop are being generous and extending the discount through the whole month of April. So thanks to them for that. To help organize us, we have put the books into categories, and this is the order that we will follow. We're going to start with contemporary fiction. We are going to move into historical fiction. We're then going to do nonfiction, then memoir, then sort of the genre category, which is sci-fi, fantasy, and mystery all lumped together. And then finally, we will finish with young adult and kids books. And for those book clubs that have never done a YA book, they often lead to the best discussions because we have all been 16. Many of the other books, you haven't had those experiences, but with the YA books, we've all had those experiences. And we threw in a kids book as well, because we know a lot of book clubs are father-son or father-daughter or mother-daughter or mother-son or some sort of combination of older readers and younger readers. So hopefully there will be something for everyone. in here. And I will call on the presenters as we go through the categories. So you'll know who's coming up and what we will hopefully be talking about. That's a lot. That's a lot of explanation. So we're going to get started, and we're going to start off with a bang. We have Carrie will start us off in contemporary fiction, and she has 4 books in this category. So she will decide what order she will present them, but she will talk about all 4 of her books in this category starting right now.
Hey everyone. So I'm going to kick it off with a short story collection. And it's not just an amazing cover. Animal Wife by Laura Ehrlich is a debut short story collection, which pulls from fairy tales that we all know, but twists them on their head and investigates what might be the real life feelings for each of the women in these stories. Feminist reimaginings of fairy tales are not new. There are lots of these in existence, but these are different and they're very exceptional. The collection is definitely more realistic than most can be. There are some magical realism moments, but it's pretty much set in our reality. And they were the kinds of stories that after each one, I wished that there was someone sitting next to me that had just read it that I could talk to. So lots of really good discussions can come from this book. My second book is probably going to hit kind of close to home for a lot of people, but this is pandemic fiction that was written before COVID-19. This is Severance, the debut novel from Ling Ma. I like to describe it as a quiet apocalypse novel, which I know sounds strange, but I've read a lot of post-apocalyptic fiction, and this one is really unique. It's just this very quiet story. It's a young millennial professional who is starting out in the publishing industry in New York City, and then all of a sudden people start getting sick. Now, I read this long before our pandemic days, and I don't know how it would read now that we've all lived through and are living through, an actual pandemic. But there's definitely going to be a lot to talk about. There's a nice little surprise in here. If you are at all interested in the publishing industry, you get this really interesting inside look into the printing portion of the publishing industry, which primarily happens in China. So just a little added bonus. Book number 3, another one that might be kind of difficult. This is a children's Bible by Lydia Millet. This is hands down the best book that I read in 2020. I read it right at the start of quarantine, so just over a year ago. I didn't really know what I was getting into. If I had known the premise, I probably wouldn't have picked it up, because it is about a storm that turns everything on its head, and these kids are thrown together and have to survive because their parents just can't handle it. And it's really, really well done. It's written very simply, so it almost reads like a fable, but there's so much to talk about in this book. There's religion and belief and human nature and survival and generational differences. There's just so much to talk about, especially now in 2021. So hopefully you'll consider reading this one with a group, because you're going to want someone to talk to about it. And finally, follow that up with the best book I've read so far in 2021, Sharks in the Time of Saviors by Kawai Strong Washburn. This one it's a family story with a twist of life as a native Hawaiian. The family we follow is down on their luck and about to move to the main island of Hawaii in search of better employment and opportunity. Before they make the move, an incident happens, a miracle even, to their middle child. What follows is a story told from multiple points of view about growing up, what it means to be a part of a family, what it's like to be Hawaiian on both the islands and on the mainland. and also what it's like to grow up surrounded by a really deep mythology and maybe even be a part of it. It's beautifully written, it draws you in, and it will not let you go.
Great. Thank you so much. I hope everyone noticed that the covers of each of her 4 books could not have been more different if they tried. Like, I feel like there's some artwork that we could do at the end of this. And I'm appreciative of the Hawaii book. My in-laws lived in Hawaii for 6 years, and I feel like that was the highlight of their life. So that will be on their Christmas list. And I want to point out that in the opening salvo of this event, we got Carrie's best book for 2020 and 2021. So take it away, Liana.
Hi, everyone. The first book I'm going to talk about is The Friend by Sigrid Nunez. And this won the National Book Award in 2018. And I came across a quote where Nunez was talking about the fact that she had read in an interview in the Paris Review that Nicholson Baker stated, all novels are trying to answer the question, is life worth living? She said she found it after she'd finished writing this book, and she thought it was so perfect and so true, she included it in its opening pages. This is a story that's told by an unnamed narrator who's just learned that her mentor has died by suicide. She's both a writer and a writing instructor, and her therapist suggests that writing about her grief might help. And so the novel becomes her answer to this assignment of sorts. As a dog lover, which is part of the story, I loved watching a growing relationship between our narrator and Apollo, who is a 180-pound Great Dane that she inherits from her mentor and needs to move into her 500-square-foot apartment. As an English teacher, I love the way Nunez weaves. She weaves in a lot of quotations and anecdotes from the works and lives of other writers. I mean, for me, I just loved that part of it. She moves smoothly between these heartbreaking and comical scenes as her relationship with this dog grows. She was not a dog person before this. And also these kind of philosophical musings about life and the act of writing. While I would say this is definitely a story about grief, there's also a lot of love, friendship, writing, and thinking about that question, how do you make your life worth living? Which is something. Oh, so she also has a new novel that just came out, which is called What Are You Going Through? And it came out in 2020. And one of the reviewers from NPR said it was like a companion piece to The Friend, but tackles some slightly different issues, more about climate change, but still kind of our mortality. But I highly recommend it. If you like to talk about writing, think about writing, if you love dogs, this is something that really puts it all together. And thank you, Carrie, for holding up the cover. The second book that I'm going to talk about is Afterlife. And this is a book by Julia Alvarez, who's a local writer, and which some of you probably know. She lives in Vermont, was a professor at Middlebury. And this story is set in 2019 in a small town in Vermont. It's about a professor who has just retired from a college in Vermont. So there's a lot of things that kind of shares with the author. But it focuses on a character named Antonia Vega. And she, in the very opening chapter, she's on her way to meet her husband for dinner to celebrate her retirement. And unfortunately, he never makes it to the restaurant because he dies of a heart attack en route. So just as she's about to start on this new stage in life that she's imagined with him, now she's alone. The title refers to this fact that she has to kind of reimagine her life now after his death, but also it has another sense to it where she's trying to think about how to keep his memory alive. While it is also another book about grief, it's also, she's got these complicated relationships with her sisters. It talks about sort of these gifts and obligations of family. There's some funny parts to that as well, and timely topics such as immigration, and a question that I've often asked my students: what is our responsibility to others? I came across a quote by Alvarez in an interview in the LA Times that I just loved, and I think really gives you an idea of what this, I loved this book, what this book is about. So she says, many of my novels have a soundtrack that no one else ever hears. In this case, it was Leonard Cohen's song Anthem with a particular line: there is a crack in everything, that's how the light gets in. In that brokenness and fragmentation that happens when the life you had falls apart, you hope you end up with a larger version of yourself. So I highly recommend this one.
Thank you very much, Liana. Wow, that's hard to follow. And I want to give a shout out to Carrie too. I forgot to say, some of us don't have copies of our books. So if you look in Carrie's corner, she is holding up some of the covers as we talk. So that's why Liana wasn't holding up her book. She's at a location where her books did not follow, but the rest of us. And so thank you for that. Julia Alvarez is one of my favorite authors. And I have to say, she is also just a incredibly generous author to many people here in Vermont. So it's nice to see her work recognized. It's hard to follow, but I'm going to try. So I'm riffing a little bit off of immigration. Immigration, undocumented workers, borders, border crossing, coyotes, border walls, xenophobia, citizenship, and voting. They all bring up all sorts of emotions and images that differ for every one of us, depending on our own lived experiences and our exposure to the people that are behind all of those words. For instance, anyone who's been lucky enough to witness or participate in a naturalization ceremony, we're forever marked by the joy that's expressed there. Anyone who has known or is an undocumented worker is forever marked by the hope and fear that guides their lives. For the rest of us, well, we have books, and I have two that help bring these words to life for us. The first, because it is National Poetry Month, is Unaccompanied, a collection by the poet Javier Zamora. He was born in El Salvador. He was educated in the United States. And this book describes with well-chosen words the lives of the undocumented in the United States. The second book is my favorite book so far in 2021. This is the best book that I have read so far. And it's called Infinite Country by Patricia Engel. And I loved her debut collection of short stories as well, Vita. So if people like short stories, I would highly recommend her debut collection. In this book, it's a full novel, although it is a short novel. So if book clubs are pressed for time, this might be a good book for you if you have a month that's shorter than others or that's especially busy. This book highlights what a life is like when it's torn between two countries. It shows, I think perhaps more vividly than anything I've read, how the decision to become undocumented is not made in one fell swoop. It's made in 1,000 of small decisions that take place over time. It stunningly shows how the 5 family members involved in this book are affected by immigration, by deportation, and their varying legal statuses in the United States. Each member of this family has a completely different story and a completely different status as a result of that story. And it's fascinating how she ties all of that together. Along the way, she movingly portrays the beauty of Colombia and the hope of life in the United States. I hope that one of the 3 books I mentioned, along with what Liana just talked about, might help those book clubs that are interested in exploring the headlines and the people behind the headlines around immigration. So I got one more, sorry. There's one more in this book. I forgot. I thought we were getting ready to go to historical fiction. Okay, so if Infinite Country was my favorite book so far in 2021, The next book was my favorite book in 2019, and it is a book that I have never heard anyone talk about ever. So it is called When We Were Vikings, and it's by Andrew David McDonald, and Carrie is holding up the cover. And that's the paperback cover, which I had not seen. I saw the hardcover. I loved this book, and I am so bummed that it came out right before COVID and I did not get to tell people about it. So read it. Okay. For those who need a little bit more information than me just telling you it was my favorite book from 2019 and to read it, here's a summary. This book, lovingly with great prose, I mean, incredible prose and a terrific plot, reminds all of us that we are all legends of our own making. And I think that that is a huge thing to remember as we come out of a year of a pandemic. The heroine Zelda has some significant health issues. She knows they all stem from fetal alcohol syndrome. She doesn't really understand what that means, but she has a fierce determination to live her life as boldly as possible. She also has an obsession with the Vikings, the historical kind, not the Minnesota football team, and that helps her with her boldness quest when she runs into obstacles. The book begins with her 21st birthday party, and it slowly unfolds to show how she and her brother Gert, I think I'm pronouncing that properly, navigate the honestly crappy hand that life has dealt them. They have a dead mother, an absent father, an abusive uncle, and poverty. When Gert, who is trying to take care of them both and keep his college scholarship, makes what I would generously call some poor decisions, Zelda rises to the challenge and to the rescue with some help from a superb librarian, and who doesn't love a book where a librarian plays a role, a great social worker, and Gert's strong-minded and on-again and off-again girlfriend named AK-47. You really can't make this stuff up, although he did. You'll cheer Zelda on every step of the way, and you'll be a bit sad when you leave her orbit. I really can't recommend this book highly enough, and I think there would just be a lot of fun conversations that would stem out of it. So we now move, we're trying to avoid too many transitions to keep this going, into historical fiction, and I will start. The next book, and Carrie's going to hold it up because I don't own it, which I need to remedy very quickly, is a book called Hamnet. And I'm cheating and I'm pairing it with Hamlet, because when you read Hamnet, you are going to want to probably revisit, but at least read Hamlet at the same time. This was my very favorite book from 2020. So I've done 2019, 2021, and 2020. And Maggie O'Farrell, I fell in love with her books when I read Instructions for a Heat Wave, I think about the heat wave in London in 1975. Loved her books. And when I saw this book called Hamnet, I was like, I'm going to read this. When I found out it's about Shakespeare, I was like, this is a huge winner. So what she does in Hamnet is she brings to life the elusive woman from Elizabethan England, not Queen Elizabeth, but Shakespeare's wife. We don't really know a lot about her, and that gives Miss O'Farrell a ton of runway to play with the concept. So she bases this book around Shakespeare's son's death from the plague, which would be a great entry point to talk about COVID and the pandemic for those book clubs that are ready for that. If you're not ready for that, it doesn't matter. It's plague, it's historical, you can read it, you can move on. And then the novel explores what life might have looked like for Shakespeare's wife. For her, accusations of witchcraft and a very sick son. For him, adultery. Then it talks about what happens when all of that mixes together. Her prose sings along the way, and it will make you want to revisit Hamlet. It will make you want to go to England when we can all travel. And I just think that you will enjoy thinking about what it takes to be the person behind someone who is considered a genius. So that's my recommendation, Hamnet. And the next two books in this category are from Liana, although I had to laugh. We put one of her books takes place in 1990 as historical, and I kind of took offense to that.
Well, Lisa, I just have to follow up. Someone had put in a college group I belong to on Facebook they had found a mug that they called vintage, and it was from 1995. And I thought, oh boy. Okay, so with that, the first book I'll talk about is Writers and Lovers by Lily King. And I went to college in the Boston area during the 80s and then stayed. So this was a lot of fun because this book is set in Boston in 1997, and there's all kinds of references to familiar locations, music, events. And our narrator is a aspiring writer in her early 30s. Her name is Casey Peabody. She's also a waitress in Harvard Square. She's smart, she's witty, very likable. She's also grieving for her mother, who passed away the year before. And in addition to her mother's death, she's also had a recently failed relationship, and these have left her just untethered. She's filled with self-doubt. She's estranged from her father, who doesn't support her choice to be a writer. And King does a great job of just pulling you in to Casey's life as she struggles between wanting to follow her passion to be a writer, but also struggling to pay for rent and wondering at what point does she give up on her dream, or how does she find, the ability to keep going. I think her story will give book groups a lot to talk about in terms of the costs of trying to pursue creative life. In our world, we're not easy on artists, but also just what is it, how do each of us define what success is in terms of our careers or in terms of love? And, Casey's trying to figure out who her family is now. So what constitutes a family? But I highly recommend it. And I know, Lisa, you said this was one of the books you had really liked too.
I loved it.
Okay. The next book I'll talk about is The Dutch House by Ann Patchett. And some of you have probably read some of her other work. She wrote Bel Canto, State of Wonder, Commonwealth. If you know this writer, if you've read those books, you know that she does a really good job at creating memorable characters, and you won't be disappointed with this book either, because she does just that. So this story spans 5 decades. It moves back and forth in time as the narrator, Danny Conroy, tells us about his family. Danny's father, Cyril, was a poor Irish immigrant living in Brooklyn in the 1940s, and he's a self-made man. He creates a real estate empire for himself. He's buying properties all over Philadelphia, and his biggest source of pride is this home that's called the Dutch House. It's a lavish, ornate home. It was built in 1922 by a Dutch family. And he buys it as a surprise for his family. And for him, it's a real status symbol. Now, his 2 kids, Danny, our narrator, and Danny's older sister, Maeve, adjust easily to this new lifestyle, but their mother does not. The house becomes this thing that unravels the family. And at one point, Danny and Maeve find themselves even banned from the home. So this is a story about having to reimagine what home is, what is a family. It also explores issues of class, but it's also about different generations in family. Like, how do we make peace with difficult events from our childhood, and how much are we willing to forgive? So I think there's a lot to hold on to with this one.
Great. So that finishes our fiction section, sort of. We have some more fiction coming up, but our pure fiction section of historical and contemporary. And for those book clubs that like to mix it up with some nonfiction, we have a couple of books for you. The first is Think Again by Adam Grant. This is a good book for clubs who like, or people, readers, who like books with facts and data and thought-provoking arguments and theories. Mr. Grant is a professor at Wharton in Pennsylvania, and this book, which is one of many he has written, illustrates that we don't have to, nor should we, believe everything we think. We don't have to internalize everything we feel. He shows that the ability to rethink and unlearn is essential to our success, but probably most importantly, it's essential to our happiness. He challenges us to embrace the discomfort of doubt, to stop listening to, and this is important, America, to stop listening only to opinions that make us feel good, and instead to seek many ideas that make us think hard. He proves that knowing what we don't know is actually true wisdom for all of us. And along the way, he shares enough stories to stimulate really good discussions, including the answer to this question: how do you make a Yankee fan a Red Sox fan? So, I mean, you should read it just for that if you live in the Vermont, New Hampshire, New York area. I feel like we will avoid a lot of wars if people decide to read this. The next book/books, because I cheated yet again, is our 3 books that help us talk about race and racism. And I picked these because I keep hearing so many of us are struggling right now with how to talk about race, how to talk about racism, how to be anti-racist. And these 3 books all help you approach those discussions from very, very different points of entry. And I don't know what the personality of your book club is. I don't know what the personality of your house is. So I wanted to give 3 options that would help us address this really important question. As a result, I'm going to try to talk really quickly because it's 3. The first is Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man. It's by Emmanuel Achu, and he has a podcast by the very same name. So you could skip the book, but you shouldn't, because we should all have books, and go to his podcast. He is a former NFL player, and he divides this book in a Q&A format. Each chapter approaches a question and he provides his answer. And the questions are such questions like, what are some of the best ways to find your own and get rid of your own implicit bias? Or what is the best way to let someone know that you care about them? So that's for people who kind of prefer, here's a question, here's an answer, this is what he looks like. It's just really straightforward, and I found it very helpful. The next book is for those people who need some humor in their lives. And this is called You'll Never Believe What Happened to Lacey. And this is written by Amber Ruffin. I had Miss Ruffin. I was being very formal. She is a comedian, and she is the first African-American, or she would say Black, writer for Seth Meyers' Late Show. So she is funny. But most importantly, for the purposes of this book, she's blessed with a sister, Lacey, who, because Lacey is a petite Black woman living in Omaha, Nebraska, crazy things happen to her. Lucky for us, Lacey calls Amber every time one of those incidents happens. And lucky for us again, they decided writing them all down and collecting them in a book would be helpful. So this just really uses humor and real life stories that happen to this particular Black woman living in Omaha, Nebraska, to help us think about all the times we step in it. The last book brings racism home to Vermont. And this is a collection of essays called Black is the Body. It's written by Emily Bernard. She is a professor at UVM of English. She is a Black woman, and she writes, each essay is just firmly grounded in the experience of what it is like to be a person of color in a very, very white space like Vermont. So it's these 3 books. One uses humor, one uses Q&A, and one uses essays. You could even cheat and just pick one of the essays to talk about if it's the month of February and you don't have very many days to read. And with that, it is time to move into memoir, which is sort of what the essays were. So the person who's going to start us off there is our Vanna White of the covers, Carrie.
So I really enjoy when authors use humor to talk about difficult things. So I would definitely need the Amber Ruffin book. But also, this one just came out today, Jenny Lawson, Broken in the Best Possible Way. Jenny Lawson has written a few other books. They all are, collections of memoirs. And ruminations on things that have happened to her. And this one talks a little bit about book related stuff because she's written a few books now. But this one, more than any of her other collections, takes a big look at her depression and anxiety. And she has a lot of it, and it's very intense. And the degree to which it affects her life is very severe, but she's able to laugh about it. And she makes this such an approachable topic. It's something that I think a lot of us deal with in lesser ways, even if it's not full-blown issues with depression or something. I think we all, especially after this past year, can sympathize with a lot of the stuff that's going on. This book will spur a ton of discussions, and it will also make you laugh out loud while you're reading. So just be careful where you're reading it, because if you're reading in public, you might get embarrassed. And my next selection for memoir is very different. This is actually a graphic novel. This one is called The Best We Could Do by Thi Bui. She is the author and artist. It's done in this really beautiful, simple tones. Thi is the child of Vietnamese immigrants. And she is a mother, and she's looking at her relationship with her own children by investigating what her parents went through when they escaped from Vietnam when she was only a few months old. So there's a lot of flashbacks and looking at what happened to her family. There's a lot of her trying to figure out how to be the mom that she wants to be when her example of how parents related to her was very different. So it's great if you're looking for another kind of format. Some graphic novels can be very difficult to follow. This one is not. Even with the flashbacks and things, it's very simple format to read. So wouldn't be as problematic as some might be. So yes, that's The Best We Could Do by Thi Bui.
Great. I'm glad we finally got a graphic novel in. And now we have Liana with 2 more in this memoir category.
Okay, I read 2 memoirs that could not be more different. One was Untamed by Glennon Doyle, and the other one was All You Can Ever Know by Nicole Chung. And Carrie, I'm going to start with All You Can Ever Know. So this memoir by Nicole Chung it's really about the power of stories. And one of the first stories or type of stories that she explores are the stories we're told when we're young, and how they shape the way we perceive ourselves, even if we might not always believe those stories. Chung grew up in a small white town in Oregon, and her white parents were always open with her about her adoption. They explained to her that her Korean parents could not provide her with a good life, and so out of love, they put her up for adoption. This story of her birth parents' sacrifice out of love is what brings her comfort over the years when she wonders how could they have given her up. As an adult and expectant mother, Chung actively begins to search for her birth parents. She lets us into her experience and takes us on her journey as she learns that a lot of the stories she was told about her childhood are not, that a lot of them are not accurate about her birth. She gives this unflinching, honest portrayal about what she uncovers, and as the title suggests, the limitations too that she comes across about what she simply cannot uncover or ever know. While some of her discoveries are painful, but there are others that enrich her life. So with this memoir, you get insight into issues surrounding adoptions. She challenges, I would say, some of the narratives out there about adoptions. But her story also simply touches upon what it means to belong, and the many definitions again of a family. But it's a quieter memoir, not like Untamed, not like something like The Glass Castle, but it I really enjoyed it. Okay, so the next one is Untamed by Glennon Doyle. And this one is a book that my daughter, who is a sophomore in college, recommended to me. And honestly, it wouldn't have been a book I would have taken off of the shelf. But I was definitely curious because she doesn't usually recommend books. And she said to me, Mom, it is so good. So I ordered it without even reading about it. And I'd never heard of Glennon Doyle, and I'm a little embarrassed to now say that I see she's this New York Times bestselling author, activist, speaker. So now I know who she is. In this book, she pulls you in right away into her family. She gives you this front row seat as she's discovering these many layers of how she's been tamed by societal expectations. Her previous books have been honest about her battles with bulimia and alcoholism and her path out of these addictions, and her successful marriage and 3 children. But one of the opening scenes of Untamed is where she's at an event for her book, Love Warrior, that talks about what I just listed. And her whole life changes when she meets a person who makes her question everything she has been certain about. So I don't want to give anything else away about that part. She offers words of wisdom about a range of topics. I mean, there's almost nothing she doesn't touch upon in this book. So it would give book groups a lot of different things to talk about. And I would say, you know, she's louder. And for some people who might find her almost preachy, I find just when you're getting to that point, she takes you down this humble road detour where she exposes her shortcomings in these sometimes heartbreaking, sometimes laugh out loud funny ways. So I found myself really kind of pushed and pulled all the way through to the end. I do think it'll give any group something to talk about.
Great, thanks. As the mother of 2 adopted children biracially, or I had read All You Can Ever Know with a little bit of trepidation, and it's fabulous. I just thought she very thoughtfully talks about a lot of really difficult things. And I have not yet read Untamed, so I guess that's going to have to happen. And Liana is going to lead us into our next category. We only have 2 categories left, so there will be time for questions and answers at the end. And our next category is sci-fi, fantasy, and mystery.
Okay. So this is a book, and I know that Carrie liked this book. She shared that. So Carrie, you can jump in when I'm done if there's anything you want to add here. This is called The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. And, you know, if I were presenting this to my students, I might start with a question like, if you could live forever, would you want to? And what would you be willing to give up for this immortality? So this is a story of Adeline LaRue, who as a young girl in a small village in France in the 18th century is about to be married to a man she doesn't love. In fact, she doesn't want to marry at all. She doesn't want to have children, even though this is what is expected of a girl during this time. She literally runs from her wedding in her wedding dress into the woods to beg the gods to help her. And when one answers, she makes a deal. She asks for her freedom and independence, and she gets it, but she learns the cost too late. So this story spans 300 years, and you move to locations in Europe, a few cities in the United States, and some readers might be disappointed. She doesn't really touch upon other places in the world or really get into societal issues, but she's a very likable character, and her experience draws you in and makes you wonder, how might you spend your days if they were endless? So a lot of the books I realize that I have talked about have focused on grief. And even though Addie is also grieving some aspects of her life, her story is really about how do you live? Is it important to leave a mark on the world? If you don't or can't leave a mark on the world, does that mean your life has no value? And what does it take to live a life of purpose or a life of value? So Carrie, I don't know if you want to add anything.
And Carrie, add and then move into your selections.
Yes. It's not the main part, like the book is beautiful. Liana, you explained it exactly right. The love story that's involved is not the main part, but I loved it so much. I like to tell people in the store that if you read the book The Night Circus and you have just like a hole in your heart from that book, this will fill the hole. I've never read another one of V.E. Schwab's books, but now I want to read them all. It's a really beautifully done story. The next book is very different. This one is called Radiance by Catherynne Valente. She is one of my most favorite authors. Every one of her books is wildly different. She's written on everything from like Japanese mythology short stories to Russian fairy tales to inventing her whole own mythology and things. This is an alternate history novel. It's set in like the 1940s, but a version of the 1940s where everybody lives on all 9 planets in the solar systems. Yes, Pluto is included. And it is a love letter to the golden age of film, but set in space. So a little different. It's filled with Art Deco stuff and lots of things about movies. The main character is a documentary filmmaker who's railing against the kinds of movies that her famous filmmaker father made. He made like these glossy romances and blockbuster films, and she wants to be serious about the work. She disappears while making a film on one of the planets, and the whole book is fitting all the pieces together. So it's written in an epistolary format. So it's radio plays, it's screenplays, it's interviews with people, it's letters that were written. There are some more, regular novel type parts, but it's definitely a puzzle of a book, and it's set in space. What could be bad about that? So for something a little different, if you're trying to find something more in an actual sci-fi vein, this falls into a lot of sub-genres of science fiction, but it's really just a story about family and love and exploration. And it's really beautifully told.
And that cover, I mean, you kind of had me at the cover. And then when you said film and space, although I do remember watching Lost in Space as a kid, and I've just aged myself again for getting upset that a historical fiction took place in the 90s. And now Lost in Space. A lot of bad things can happen in space. So your question of what could be wrong with space can be answered by lots of monsters. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to take us out of that, and I'm moving us into mysteries. And I'm cheating again. So my one pick is actually 2. There's a pattern here. And they're both mysteries by Sarah Taylor, and they're part of her latest mystery series. The first book in the series came out last year in 2020, one of the good things that emerged from 2020, Mountains Wild. And I have an advanced copy of the second book in the series called A Distant Grave, and that comes out in June. So I recommend these 2 books for 5 big reasons. 1, they're just really superbly crafted mysteries. 2, they will leave you longing to visit Ireland, but also feeling like you sort of were already there. So you could get a little bit of satisfaction to plan your next trip. 3, Sarah is a local author, and I love to promote local authors. And in this case, I really love to promote a local author because this is just a really good book, as is the sequel. So 4, the main characters are Long Island homicide detective Maggie D'Arcy, and I'm sure I said that incorrectly, her detecting partner Dave, her daughter Lily, her uncle Danny, her Irish beau Connor. They're all worth investing some time into getting to know, and you have quite a few pages to get to know them if you read both books. And number 5, and this is probably the biggest reason, finally, Sarah has told me and has told the Yankee Bookshop that she will come and visit any book club that buys 7 or more of her books from the Yankee Bookshop. So if your bookshop is looking to have an author come and visit you, and that may mean by Zoom, you may delay it until we're all vaccinated and it could be in person. How fun would that be? She will come and visit your book club if you buy 7 or more of these books from the Yankee Bookshop. Hopefully you don't need any more reasons than that, but if you do, ask me in the Q&A and I'm sure I'll find a few more. And that brings us to our final official category of the evening, although I'm sure in the Q&A we can probably come up with some other stuff. And that is young adult or YA and kids. And Carrie is going to get us started.
All right, so the first one that I have is intended more for middle grade readers, so that would be like ages 8 to 12. It is called The Night Diary by Veera Hiranandan, and it's a historical fiction novel for kids. This book looks at the partition of India in 1947, the creation of India and Pakistan, through the eyes of a 10-year-old girl. And her story is that she and her father need to leave their home because they are currently in the land that's about to become Pakistan. And their beliefs align more with the people who live in India. So they basically just have to like take whatever they can carry and run because they've got to get there before everything becomes official. And she knows that they're in danger, but she's a 10-year-old girl. So her understanding of what that danger is not complete. I love reading books that are from a child's point of view, because everything is very simplified, right? They don't bring all the baggage and experience that we adults have to everything that they're experiencing. They just feel it in that moment and they see what's happening and they tell you exactly what that is. This book is simple, but it's beautiful. It will make you cry. And it would be a great piece of discussion on a part of history that a lot of us really don't know much about at all. And my last official pick for the evening is The Poet X, also for Poetry Month, by Elizabeth Acevedo. If you have become obsessed and entranced by Amanda Gorman, what she does that's so wonderful to watch is a version of something called slam poetry. And this book is about a young girl. She's a teen from the Bronx who's having a hard go of it. She's not agreeing with her mother very much. And, you know, like we all do when we're teenagers. Who likes your mom when you're a teenager? Sorry, Mom, I know you're here. But she gets invited to join the slam poetry group at her high school. And through that, she finds her voice. And the whole book is written in poetry. So it goes very quick, really short read. But just like those poems by Amanda Gorman, it sucks you in and you will feel everything, and you won't want to put it down. So this is definitely one, if you're in a pinch for time but still want all the feels.
I loved The Poet X so much that I have read everything by Elizabeth Acevedo. And I think in one of the Book Jam posts, I was just like, I just need to confess, I think she is my favorite YA author right now. She is fabulous. And The Poet X is a perfect entry into her work. And then when you were describing The Night Diary, all I could think of was it's a lot shorter than A Suitable Boy, which I remember reading and loving years ago, but having to take a break halfway through because it was such a tome. So to get that piece of history from A Suitable Boy through a kid's eyes would be fabulous. I'm going to go into my YA pick, and it is Fat Chance Charlie Vega. I have it. This is what I have. And this is a lovely, lovely coming of age story for all the readers out there who feel outside the norm due to body size or actually other reasons. And for all the friends who love those people who feel a little outside the norm. Charlie is a self-described fat brown girl whose dad passed away not so long ago when the story starts, whose best friend is gorgeous and of course thin, and who of course is also beloved by all. Charlie's mother was fat like her until she discovered miraculous weight loss shakes that she now insists on pushing on a very uncooperative Charlie. So that's sort of the setup. If that wasn't enough, complicating matters even further, Charlie is in love, and I mean in love in the way only a junior in high school can be in love, with the star football player Cal. And Cal has firmly planted Charlie in the friend zone. At least that's what we used to call it. I don't remember what they call it exactly in the book. And he probably has her there only because he actually wants access to her beautiful best friend. Charlie is smart and she's aware, and she recognizes the cliche of the fat friend in love with the star football player who is using her for class notes and access to the beautiful friends. She knows that. She knows that's what's happening. And yet she firmly, with every fiber of her being, believes that things with Cal will just be different if Cal will only look at her. That's all it will take, and her life will be transformed. Luckily, because we all know that that probably won't end very well. Charlie has her notebook, she has her stories, and she has a desire to be the best writer possible. Even more luckily, Charlie has an after-school job in a workspace that is shared by a very nice boy from her art class. Enjoy this ride through the junior year of high school. Enjoy Charlie and enjoy her friends. They will truly, truly give you hope for humanity. And they also remind me that the world is going to be a better place when the kids who are in high school are in charge. So, and then the final book of the evening on our official program is a book that I would say could be YA, but I actually think it might be for younger readers. But I always hesitate to tell you kind of ages because I feel each kid is different. So this book is called Stand Up, Yumi Chung. And it is a book that starts with a small lie. Okay, it's not a small lie. It's actually a pretty big lie, but it's unintentional. And that spirals into an adventure about the importance of family, how new friends can change your world, and finding one's true self. Which, because as we talked about in the beginning, all these kids in YA books are about finding yourself, which makes them so rich for discussions in book clubs. In this story, Yumi's dreams, she dreams of being a stand-up comic. And those dreams are not understood by her parents, who are two very hardworking US immigrants from Korea, who are fighting to keep their Los Angeles restaurant alive and to provide a better life for their two daughters. When Yumi's parents send her to an SAT boot camp so she can earn a scholarship to a prep school, she stumbles into a summer camp for stand-up comics. The novel then explores, can she do both? Which side of her life will win, the comic or the respectful daughter? Can her parents save their restaurant? Answering the questions, in answering these questions, the book lands so firmly on funny. Like listening to her try to learn how to tell a joke is funny in and of itself without the jokes. It's heartfelt and it's sad all at once. It's an especially great book for preteens who, like her, you know, you don't really like your mom or your dad very much when you're a teen, but you might still be trying to be the respectful daughter or son. So it's a good book for kids who are trying to figure that out, like how to become their own self and still be respectful, or at least not ungrateful. And for anyone who's looking for a relatable heroine, because Yumi is far from perfect. I also want to bring up the fact that I think it would make an excellent entry point into discussions about what is happening to how Asian Americans are viewed and treated in the United States, both today and historically. It would be another way to enter that conversation. So that is our final book. I want to say thank you so much to the three presenters. And we now can move to a question and answer portion. And I think how we decided we would do this is if participants would like to put questions in the Q&A, I will read them and ask the two other presenters to answer them. And I'm going to start while you guys are typing with a question that I saw in the chat at the very beginning, which is, why didn't we recommend any classics? And also, if we were to recommend a classic, what would those be? So Carrie, do you want to start with that? Not to put you on the spot, but if you have a classic that you think would be good for people to read as a book club.
Yeah. Personally, why I didn't pick any classics is just because I haven't read any lately. So that's all for me. I think actually, if I were to pick one though, I had a discussion recently with one of our customers, one of our regulars from town, about The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. And I think we were talking about it in conjunction with another local author's book that recently came out, Come Fly the World by Julia Cook, which is a book about the women who were stewardesses for Pan Am in the 60s and 70s. And this kind of led this patron down a rabbit hole, which eventually led to the Bell Jar. And she reread it and enjoyed rereading it so much. And it's one that I've never read myself. So I think that would be a suggestion from me for right now.
And Leanna, you must have some from teaching years of high school. There's got to be some.
Right, but I also have that addled memory. It's hard to get something. But when you were talking about Hamnet, I mean, Hamlet is one of my favorites, and we use that with our seniors. I just think there is so much in that play. I think it would be a great companion, I think, as you might have said, to go along with Hamnet, to do the both of them. There's so much, and it is also about, trying to find yourself, your separation from your parents, and trying to figure out what is the truth and how important it is to know the truth. Another one of my favorites is Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. I think it's beautifully written, and you have, it's framed in this oral storytelling format. But it's also because I think it doesn't follow a lot of the expected twists and turns that you might expect it to. It's about love, it's about finding a voice. And I think that Janie is such an awesome character. So that would be one of my recommendations.
Okay, great. I'll do three really quickly. And I don't read a lot of nonfiction, so I'm kind of surprised that two of them are nonfiction. But one is A Movable Feast, which just is a delicious and enlightening look at Paris during the time of Hemingway and Fitzgerald and the salons and just the time between wars and what was going on. And it just does a really good job of exploring what life was like for a certain group of people in a very particular time and place. And then the other one is West with the Night by Beryl Markham, which is just a fabulous book about a very adventurous woman in Africa from the early 20th century. I don't remember actually, maybe the late 19th, but she's flying planes, so it's got to be the early 20th century, and the adventures she had in Africa. And then the third one just popped into my head, talking about high school books. My son read this as a sophomore, I think, maybe a freshman in high school, and it's The House on Mango Street. And it's just spectacular. And it's just written so differently from straightforward prose, and the perspectives you get are so varied of what's going on in this neighborhood of Mango Street. And as my son said, and he is Latino, it was the first required reading that he had encountered by a Latino author. And that sort of struck me that it took a long time to get there. So I was grateful that that had happened. But I feel like any of these classics, for those of you, in your book club that are looking for a classic, anything that we just mentioned might work really well. Okay.
I would second that. House on Mango Street, Sandra Cisneros. It's deceptively simple
Yes.
in the way that she presents the stories, beautifully written, poetic, but each piece is packed. There's a lot to unpack if you want to.
Right.
And we use it too with our sophomores.
Oh, I'm so glad. So it must have been his sophomore year. It all gets to be a blur. The next one, there was a question about what is our favorite book of all time, or sort of our go-to book if you're going to recommend a book to someone. And I'll let Carrie, because she's unmuted.
Oh gosh. I think I'll go with the book that I've given to the most people, which is actually, it is a children's book. It's by Catherynne Valente, the author that I presented for Radiance. It's got a really long title. It's called The Girl Who Circumnavigated Fairyland in a Ship of Her Own Making. And it's a book that I think absolutely anyone can relate to. Catherynne Valente was a poet before she wrote novels, and the language that she writes this kid's book in is the most beautiful. I would stop and have to read portions of it out loud because it was so beautifully written that I wanted to hear it. And it's a simple story. It's a girl who on her 11th birthday gets whisked off to fairyland and has to fight an evil queen. But there's so much truth about growing up and making choices and figuring out who you're going to be, and who you want to be, and how do you reconcile that difference, if there is one, between where you find yourself and where you want to be. It's just one of the most beautiful books I've ever read, and it's very simply written. But yeah, I've given that one to the most people. So
that's a great way to think about it. I like that as the criteria. And I also realize I'm now going to have to read this author just based on your descriptions of all her books. So Liana, what do you have as kind of your go-to book?
Lisa, you're making me sweat. I was not prepared for that question.
Neither was I. It came from the people. Don't blame it. I'm just the messenger.
I have a bookshelf in my office at home that's separate from all the other bookshelves filled with books in my house where I keep my favorites. And I'm sitting here trying to remember my titles. I'm going to have to add that. I honestly, I can't right off the top of my head even come up with something at this moment.
That is fair enough. And it's kind of I feel like it's like choosing your favorite child. How can you do that? I'll go with the same, what is the book that I have put in the most names, and now the name of it, I can picture the cover. It's Anna Gavalda. It's a French author, and it was given to me during the Gulf War. Someone, I was just depressed. I was just I can't read another depressing book, and the news is depressing, and it'll come to me in a minute. Hunting and Gathering, there we go. Hunting and Gathering by Anna Gavalda. And it's just a fun book to read. And it just puts you immediately in Paris, in this flat full of mismatched people. And you close it and you just feel good about the world. And that is the best way I can do it. I can't even remember the plot. I honestly can't remember the plot. I just remember reading it and enjoying every word and closing it and feeling hopeful about where we might be headed, which I was not when I looked at the news. So, and then we had a final question that I can see. And it was about how do you handle trigger warnings? And does that affect what books you put in front of what people? Like, how do you sort of talk about books that talk about difficult things? I'll start with, you raised your hand, Leanna, so.
Well, as a teacher, I mean, that's definitely something we have to think about. And when you look at a lot of the texts that we use in school, they really cover tough topics. And you have kids in front of you who have experienced some of these very tough things. And so, you know, a lot of times as you get to know your students, you may know that there may be something tricky that's coming up in a text, and you could talk to that person on the side, or simply say, you know, these are some of the things that we're going to talk about, you know, and in a private way. I mean, I guess I'm talking more about teaching rather than in a book group, but I do think it's important to put out the topics at the very least, for somebody to know that they're going to encounter it in the text. So it's not all of a sudden this surprise. We're talking about, you know, some really difficult topic here that you were not prepared to find in the book.
And Carrie, any thoughts as a bookseller about what you do?
I mean, if I've read a book and I know what's in it specifically, then I will warn people. You know, if they're asking for a recommendation or seem interested in something, but they mention that they don't really know that much about it, I will just mention, hey, it does deal with XYZ topics. But when someone comes in and is just asking for a recommendation, I ask questions to figure out what kind of thing they're looking for. And a lot of times those questions can help guide me, you know, is this person interested in something that could tackle a hard topic? Or does it seem like maybe we need to steer away from certain things? So it's a lot of listening, to figure out if what people are ready for or willing to take on or able to take on.
And I would just add to that, like, I think it's important to tell people what is in a book, but I try to challenge people, because I do feel that books are such a great way to have discussions about difficult things. And if we're not talking about difficult things in our day-to-day life, which, you know, kind of none of us are seeing anyone right now, except for with great intention. But books are just a really good entryway to think about things that are hard to talk about. And so with a trigger warning, I think a lot of books that tackle difficult things are great for book clubs, because they do help you figure out what you want to say about race and racism, or to admit, I have no idea what it means to be anti-racist, or, you know, that's sometimes hard to say in public, but it might be easier to say if you read a book that talks about, you know, you'll never believe what happened to Lacey, might provide the best entry point to having that difficult discussion. So, and I think with that looks like the last question. And we're going to turn this over to Kathy. So thanks, everybody.
I just want to say, just to add to that, if I may, about the trigger warning thing, is that I do the reference interview as well when I'm hand selling, if you will, a book in the library. So I do. I say it's about grief, and it's a tough book, but I don't want to say too much more than that, because you're right, Lisa. You want people to talk about that. I want to give them just a little heads up. You know, could be difficult, but then they have to decide. But so I agree with you. I just want to say a heartfelt thanks to all three of you. I could listen to you for hours more. I think we should do this every month, right? The three of you, you were all just great. And I know how much work that you've all put into it, and I so appreciate it. Just remember, for those participants still out there, if you purchase from the list tonight, from tonight's list, by April 30th, you will get that wonderful 15% discount. I just want to do another kind of quick program note. Our next program on April 15th at 7 p.m., Elizabeth Shackelford will discuss her book, which is called Dissent Channel, American Diplomacy in a Dishonest Age. She was a career diplomat with the State Department until 2017. Please look at the library website for details to register for. Be well, and thank you so much for coming, and to all the participants. It was great. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.